the opportunity now is, what do you do with what God has done with me? But what He's curated in me over all these years, not just to give me, information, but to give me expertise, not just to give me experience, but to galvanize me into some areas of my life where, if put to use, if used right, can help somebody else and kind of move someone else or something forward. I think about being a part of an effort that, like I told you yesterday, this massive, massive boulder, that I can be one of those people that are trying to push that initiative forward, pick that initiative. I've got a few that I'm passionate about today, but I'm just saying to be a part of that. I don't need to lead that effort. I want to be a part of an effort, because when you're all behind the boulder, you're so connected. You're pushing when somebody else can't push. It's just, we get to go on and on about that analogy.
And it's a big enough boulder that it needs more than just you to push.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I love
it. That's where, I got plenty in the tank and I want to use it wherever God wants me to use it.
Well, friends, my name is Drew Sams. I'm the senior pastor at Bel Air Church. Welcome to At the Table, a long format podcast where we talk about the intersection of a person's faith and their work in the world. I'm so excited to have a good friend of mine, Jack Sapp. He also is a native Angeleno, grew up in Pasadena. You're going to hear about his story. Though losing his father at the age of 8, how impactful it was later on in life to have kind of an adopted father who's a giant in the theological world, and the power of relationships, the power of mentorships. But also we're going to hear in his story not only the highs and lows across a trajectory where he was a stockbroker for many years, also was the only Black senior VP in his division at U.S. Bank, and the significant impact that God made through him there. And then also his investment in 3 Wingstop Restaurants and selling those, and now being in a place very different today in his 60s than he was at the age of 40. I had the opportunity to sit down with him at a meal recently, and I said, I've got to get you to another table, not a lunch table, but the table of this podcast. You're going to enjoy this time with my good friend, Jack Sapp. Well, here we are, Jack Sapp. What a joy to be with you. I think it was yesterday, we were sitting down in a restaurant on Ventura Boulevard eating Persian food, Green Cottage, having a great meal together. And halfway through, I was thinking, I wish we were having this conversation in the studio. So thanks for coming in. It really means a lot to me.
While you were thinking that, I was wishing I had that mint drink that you ordered. That was amazing.
Limonada. It's a lemonade, and they blend it up with mint and basil.
So good.
So great.
So good.
Well, it was yesterday where we had lunch, and I said, hey, you're not free at all by any chance tomorrow afternoon, are you? And you're at a stage of life which is really exciting, which has margin to even say yes to these things. And you're very active here in Los Angeles, part of many things. We'll get a bit into your career and your childhood and mentoring relationships. But I first got to know you through the joy of officiating your wedding a little over a year ago, premarital counseling, planning for that. So how long's it been now? A little over a year,
a year and a month.
Year and a month. So what has been, I'm trying to remember back to premarital counseling. And what's kind of neat is being here over, a year later. What's been the biggest surprise a year and a half in, married to Christy, and especially all the work that she's doing? I mean, phenomenal work. She's traveling all over the place. Love to have her on the podcast. I could have the two of you on, but also would love to individually have her on.
She's the one you need to have on.
I'm just getting to her through you now. No. But what's been a big surprise in the season for you in that married relationship? How are you discovering more about life through being married to her? I'll ask that question.
Yeah, interesting question, because I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise. I think the speed at which we've blended into each other's lives as a husband and wife for sure, and then with kids as well. I think we thought it was going to be a longer timeline for that to happen. So the fact that it's happened relatively fast has been just amazing. But Drew, as I think about it, I'd been so used to being single. I think the biggest surprise is I like being married. I had gotten so used to kind of doing things myself. And so a lot of my answers to Christy's request would be no. She said, would you like me? No, I'll do it. And so this idea of me trying to stay independent was just what a false truth I was operating on. I was used to it. Mm-hmm. I've been single for quite a while. And so to actually be with somebody who not only loves me, but wants to love me and wants to be my wife. I wanted to be her husband, so I was doing what I could, but I wasn't letting her be my wife initially. And so now as time has gone on this whole year and a month, it's just been a joy. We just keep leaning into each other. And I think the thing that's probably been the most purposeful right now is we stay very intentional about the time that we get together, how we involve each other around our kids. So we're very open about what's going on in her kid's life, my kid's life. To the extent that it's appropriate, we share those thoughts with the other kids. And we're doing all we can, literally, to try and bring our kids together, and we know that there's age differences, people are in different places, but man, we are trying to make this one big, happy partridge family. We really are.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, there's so many different people who listen into this podcast, and really the intent behind it is, helping to understand how our faith informs the work that we do. And there's certain times there's specific experiences that people have, but can be universally applied. Yeah. So you're in a specific situation right now, blended family, being married a year and a month, as you're saying. But I think it's true in friendships. I think it's true with roommates. I think it's true in family systems, where when you are together with someone, sometimes your ambition can drown out their gifts, can snuff out the beautiful individuality of who they are. And we talked in our premarital counseling about it's not so much a half plus a half equals a whole, but a 1 + 1 = 3. There's something about being whole selves and individuals with your own backgrounds, gifts, skills, and story. And I think this is true in friendships. You don't even have to be married to understand this principle. But what is advice that you might give as somebody who's married to a high-capacity leader in helping support somebody else in their natural gifts and talents? And have there been sacrifices that you've had to make in order to support her in that?
Yeah, it's been so interesting as we've gotten to know each other over time to make sure that she gets to be who she is at all costs, and that I get to be who I am, and that we can celebrate those differences, not try and snuff them out. The language we use around it is I don't want to suppress, and she doesn't want to recoil. Because when she recoils or she represses, then she's not being herself. If I suppress and go pout or whatever, then I'm not being myself. But we've taken an approach to, that we agree with each other. That we got to be ourselves, and we have to be willing to allow that for each other. The other part of it, because she is so high capacity, is I knew that going in, and really to support it. And to take an attitude that says, I'm going to support you in your endeavors to the extent that I can go with you, to the extent I can help you. I'm going to do that. It helped a lot that I come from a world where in business where I traveled quite a bit and done things that she had done, so they weren't unfamiliar to me, and that was really important. So her travel schedule, I wasn't going like, hey, what do you mean you got to leave again, or what do you mean you just got home and you got to, it was. I understand it. I know what that life is like, and she does a really good job of communicating about where she's going, when she's going, if it's important, how important, who she's going to be with. Really good job. There's just a lot of transparency in the way we both try and operate, and I think that's helped a lot. One of the things you were talking, Drew, I think we focus on, I don't want to say daily, but we talk about it often, is to realize something you told us in counseling, that this marriage is not just about us. Mm-hmm. It's actually bigger. And, not beyond, what does it mean to other people? I mean, we didn't realize how much hope we were giving to other people that, me as an old bird and her as not an old person at all, can be together and enjoy this life together. It's just been exhilarating, a lot of fun, and it's brought a lot of hope to a lot of people that we just didn't even know that would happen. So it's been bigger than we thought in terms of us being together and the way we're living our lives. It's been fun. And then to realize it's even bigger than that. I mean, it's really the God in us and through us, right?
I love that. And you're experiencing that in your marriage, within your friendship. And I think that can be true for a family unit. That can be true for friendships. That can be true for a group of friends. This idea of, you don't just exist to meet my needs, and we're not just individually being friends, but what could God do through our friendship, through this group of friends, through this household of roommates, through this family system, whatever it might be. And, if we were to back up a bit, so you're in this really exciting, unique time right now. You got your hands on a number of things, which we'll get into in a moment. Sure. But you just came out of a season where you invested and sold restaurants.
Yeah.
And before we get into that, can you walk back a bit, tell us a little bit about your career at the high level, and I'm going to pick out a couple threads. So where did it all begin with you? So I know you grew up in the area.
Yeah, I was raised in Pasadena, and went to high school there. I went to college down at UC Irvine. So I'm a Southern California guy. I've only lived outside of Southern California for about 6 years when I lived up in Oregon. But my career, growing up not having a lot of money, when I got out of college, I wanted to make some money and not really understanding what all that meant. So much went on back then, Drew. I mean, we had, I'd received Christ and, when I was in high school. And so trying to manage and understand, how do you integrate, where do I go to school and what do I do for a living? What's my occupation going to be? And how, what does God want for me? And, trying to get all that. I don't think I did that great a job at it, to be honest. I had some lofty goals and things I wanted to do. And so I believe it or not, I was reading, kind of fast forward through some of this. I was reading a magazine one day called A Popular Science. Popular Mechanic, I think it is. Popular Mechanic.
I used to subscribe to that.
Oh, me too.
Oh, yeah.
Love that magazine. And I didn't know what a stockbroker was. I read this article and I said, I want to be that guy. I want to do that.
And where were you? This is post-college.
Yeah, so I'm post-college. I had worked for a company. These are all really long stories, but you'll love this. Guy named Rod Sherman. He played for USC. He was a receiver for USC, played in the NFL, played for the Oakland Raiders for a little bit. He was he was the assistant athletic director at UC Irvine. And so through Bible studies, he and I had become friendly. So when I graduated from college, he said, "Hey, Jack, I got a job for you." So I go to work for him. He had this concept that now it's just so common, but back then he had this concept that you would get together high school coaches in the areas like Orange County, LA, West LA, and so forth, and you'd run these summer camps. And he would go out and get groups like Gatorade and others to sponsor him. Well, that
wasn't happening back then?
Didn't exist.
Happened all over the U.S. now. That's amazing.
So he goes to that, and he wanted me to go and solicit coaches. And my job was, because since I was an athlete, I played college basketball, and so since I was an athlete, you can go talk to the coaches, try and get them together. We have to pick, do side development and so forth. Well, he came to me about 2 months in, and he said, "Today's your last day." And I said, "Something happened?" And he goes, "No, I just don't have any more money." And
immediate. This is not like 6 months out on the horizon.
About 2 months.
Wow.
Jack, I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm really sorry, but it's not going to work out. So I had to go get a job. So I started, believe it or not, selling Windex and Drano to grocery stores. So that's because I had to get a job. Well, then fast forward to, I read this article in Popular Mechanics, and I'm going to be a stockbroker. I don't know anything
No prior experience. Nothing related to your degree at UC
I know
Irvine.
nothing. I majored in psychology.
Do you remember what it was in that article?
It just talked about how this guy spent his day and how there were so many moving parts to his day and how he spent it and what was involved with it. And it just caught my attention. I tell you, Drew, I could plaster this wall with all the rejection letters I got. And then
to be a stockbroker.
I gone interviewed.
So right then you set your mind on it.
Yep, started playing.
Yeah.
I got walked out of places. There was some not so nice people who thought, I go sit down. How many athletes, professional athletes do you know? None. How many people do you know in music that are professional musicians? What do you mean? I don't know any. And then they would stand me up and walk me out. This one guy, a guy named George O'Brien, never will forget him. What a great guy. He took a chance on me and he hired me. And I was determined not to let him down. My commitment to myself was when I started that job, George O'Brien would have to walk by me on his way to work and he would have to walk by me on his way home. And he did every day. And so I built a business as a stockbroker. Throughout that, I meet a guy.
And this is in L.A.
Downtown L.A. Downtown L.A. And then, oh my God, Drew. So all that works out far better than I anticipated. I was making 200 calls a day, cold calling.
So the reality of being a stockbroker lived up to what you read about it in the article.
Loved it.
Was it just the dynamic, ever-changing, fast-paced, multiple skill set reality?
Yes. And I felt like I was a part of something, the pulse of something. Because everywhere you went, back in the day where there weren't a lot of financial news stations, so people wanted to talk to you. People wanted to hear what you had to say. People wanted to know what you thought about the economy and the markets and where things were headed.
And what era was this, if you don't mind?
Oh, sure, in the early 80s.
Early 80s, okay.
Yeah.
So this is Reagan era. Off the top of my head, I can't recall what the stock market was doing in the economy. You lived through it, but this was a big thing within kind of the cultural gestalt.
Yes. It really was. And a lot of fun to be a part of. I was excited every day to go see what was going to happen today, what news was going to come out, what economic indicator was going to shift the market, or if interest rates were going to be adjusted and why. So all those things, it just fascinated me. And, I became a really quick learner in terms of getting up to speak because I didn't know nothing. That wasn't the conversation of our Thanksgiving dinner. I grew up next to my next door neighbor was a janitor. The next door neighbor on the other side, was a mechanic. So, I didn't grow up in a world where those conversations took place at all.
And this is in Pasadena, and I know you shared with me that your dad died at the age of 8 for you. Mm-hmm. Who were some influences in those early years? It was your mom. Did your mom play a really big role?
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge role.
Big for me too.
Yeah, she was amazing. I mean, in so many ways. Played a big role. She was incredibly strong, incredibly resilient, smart, just a phenomenal human being in all ways. And so, and she's got a phenomenal story, if you ask me. And I think it was really, though, to answer your question directly, it was the neighborhood I lived in.
Yeah.
Even though I had an older sister, most of my friends, we were brothers, and, we looked out for each other. And they, the older guys taught you how to do X, and the other guys taught you how to, in my neighborhood, they taught you how to fight. They taught you how to talk to girls. They taught you how to, fend for yourself. And those were valuable lessons growing up. I'm really appreciative to those guys. So it helped me a lot.
And when you think about them and you think about your mom, some things are taught, some things are caught, right? There's certain things that are verbalized, but then there's certain things that you see and you begin to emulate. What's something that you remember that your mom taught you, that she gave words to, that still rings maybe in your mind now that I bring her up?
Gosh, man, there's so many. I'll give you one that I still think about a lot today.
Yeah.
I don't know. Even as a kid, I was always very principle driven.
Where do you think that came from?
That's a great question. It had to come from her,
From her, probably.
It probably caught it from her.
Yeah.
But I was so principle driven. So she would always say, Jack, if you're not careful, you're going to end up being dead right. And I said, what do you mean? What does that mean? I don't understand. She goes, what it means is if you're at a red light and the light turns green, there's a car runs the crossing at an intersection, runs a red light, and you have a green light, you go anyway. You're going to be dead right. And that always has stuck with me throughout my life, just to really realize two things. One, that everything's not black and white. My life is more gray and shades of gray than anything else. And that, you can be principally driven, but you don't want to die over it. You just don't want to die that way. Right. So it's always been, hey, that might not be right. Or, this might not be the right way to do it, but this job is actually giving you the opportunity to do X.
Yeah. So if you draw that taught principle out that you also caught from her, that the world isn't black and white, as you said, that there's nuance and there's shades of gray. Now, it's one thing to have that perspective. It's another thing to be around people who see the world very different, who see the world in black and white. Can you think of a time, whether within friendships or in the workplace, or even recent or looking back, where you recall your view of the world not being black and white crashed up against either an environment or a view from those around you that was black and white? And if so, how did you navigate through it?
Oh, man.
Because wouldn't it be nice if the whole world saw the world the same way?
Yeah.
Which they don't.
They do not.
And even saying, it's not black or white is a perspective that I also have. I live in the tension between black and whiteness all the time. And there's always nuance in the reality of humanity. But then how nuanced is it, and how messy it is when you're in relationship with, or you work with, or you're married to, or you're working for, or you have a team reporting to you, or you're friends with somebody who's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right? It is black and white.
Yeah.
So any
there's so many. Just to kind of speak to it esoterically for a moment, right?
Yeah.
When we sit around, you and I could sit around and go, that's not right what that person's doing. It's just not right. Yeah, but they did it though. Yeah, but it's not right. And we can sit here and get conflated on that and get angry about it, and it doesn't change anything, right? Our ability to change somebody's viewpoint, our ability to change the way somebody's perception or, their paradigm, or however, whatever word you want to choose, it's just not that, we're just not that good. There's no magic words. I really think that actions speak louder than words. I just do. But to give you the one that's probably the most poignant in my life. So because I think it was really real. And my daughter was going in college, and she wrote me and then came home. We talked about it more, obviously, but she wrote me to inform me that she was a lesbian, and that was her lifestyle, and that was the lifestyle she was going to pursue. And then I was the last one she told. She told her brother, she told her mother, but she told me last because of my religious convictions, she wasn't exactly sure how I'd respond. So my response to her, after I read the letter, was I called her and I said, I just wish you were here so I could hug you and hold you, So I tell my sister a few days later.
And it sounds like that was the unexpected response from you to her.
Oh,
she thought you were going to respond a different way.
Yeah, a little more religiously, and not welcome that opportunity to just continue to love her.
Yeah.
So I tell my sister. So my sister comes from a similar background religiously and so forth. So she goes, "Well, I hope you gave her the word on that." And I said, "What word would I give her, sis?" "Well, you know what the Bible says about homosexuality." "No," I said, "Actually, why don't you tell me? Tell me what it says. And she goes, come on, Jack. Just why are you ignoring? Are you going to really act like you don't know now? Are you really going to act like you don't see what's happening? I said, tell me the world we live in where God would not love your niece and my daughter.
Especially to move towards, to embrace, to love, right?
Right. So my sister today is gray, right? She's not hardline on that today. Mm-hmm. She would interact and be with and around and for my daughter. But in that moment, she was, it's only one way. Mm-hmm. And you have to, and she was encouraging me to really kind of persecute her and shame her for her sexual orientation.
And so she was appealing to Scripture in that moment. You were sincerely asking her which Scriptures, right?
Yeah,
and some could go to different Scriptures. But as somebody of faith and as somebody who had given her life to Christ all the way back in high school, what do you see about the life of Jesus who, according to the Gospel of John, he describes him as one who is filled with and full of, not partially or even, but full of grace and truth. And grace and truth sometimes seem to be paradoxical. And so was part of your motivation to move towards your daughter, to live in this area of embrace, grace and truth, right? Motivated by how you understood Jesus, or was that just kind of instinctual or how you were raised? I'm curious to kind of get to the source of that.
Yeah, it was really how I understood the Gospels.
Yeah.
And my understanding of the Gospels, how flexible, versus rigid, right? So not versus truth versus untruth, but this flexibility of love and understanding that the God I serve, the God we serve, was the same God. As you were talking, I think about, as you were forming your question, I was thinking about this story of the woman at the well. Mm-hmm. Come on, man. Mm-hmm. You pick what her problem was, but she was out there as in by society's measure, she was out there. And then if we add on her background, where she was from, where he's from, that interaction.
Yeah, we can read it on the surface and miss all the historical, cultural implications that culture in the first century would know. Well, the fact that she's there in the middle of the day means that she's been ostracized by the community. Something's going on, because women would go in the cool of the day, in the morning, in the evening. The fact that she would be there alone, the fact that she would interact with them. There's so many layers to it.
Yeah.
But to your point, Jesus is the one who moves towards.
Went toward her.
From.
Stayed in truth.
Yes. That's key too, because that's also a bit of the complexity right now in a kind of pop culture. The pop culture, one of them is, live your truth, which is a bit of a subjective truth.
Right. Which one do you want to use today?
Which one do you want to use today,
yeah,
right?
Let's pick that one.
And so you're not advocating for that. And Jesus is one who's full of truth. He doesn't say live your truth. He says, I am the truth and follow me. But he was also full of grace.
Yeah.
And he confounded those who were seemingly the center of society, the powerful, the religious elite. And he thought, what he said caused them to rethink their whole view of the world, those on the margins. But he had meals with, and I love, we're at a table. And this podcast is called At the Table because it seems like Jesus is most frequently on his way to, at, or having just left a meal. But he ate with the down and out and the up and in.
He did.
And so it wasn't just the down and out that were on the margins. The up and in were in a different way. Maybe they were on the inside of the power circles of culture, but they were just as much lost and in need of Jesus, right?
Oh, man. That story just... it sticks with you because not only did he go toward her, he stayed honest with her, gave her truth to show who he was, and never shamed her.
Yes.
Come on.
Which those things don't compute rationally. And that's where, and I'll always say in so much of my preaching, and you've been around Bel Air, so you've heard me preach, and it is never just do better and try to emulate Jesus in your own strength, because we'll fall short. Yeah. But it's yielding to Christ in you, Christ in me, the Holy Spirit through us in ways where the same Spirit that rose Jesus from the grave now dwells in us. So the one who can move towards the woman at the well dwells in us. So that's what we have to appeal to move towards the other, whatever the other is.
It really is.
In our
and
culture.
trust in that.
Right,
Boy,
totally.
Because
we can move the goalposts. Or I'll use a basketball metaphor. We can change the 3-point line, which you wouldn't do, right?
So easy.
It's so easy to do.
So
and
easy in
it's
today's
so easy
world.
just to redraw those lines, but
Yeah.
so beautiful. So we're now going back into stockbroker.
Okay.
Jack,
Okay.
as we're popping around. And
No, I love it.
How did that develop? So, you're making 200 calls a day. I thought I made a lot of phone calls in a day.
Oh,
Rapid fire.
200 phone calls a day, making appointments.
Yeah.
I kept doing it day after day after day after day, working 10, 12 hours a day. It paid off.
And was there, where was at that point in your life, how did your faith inform the work that you did? Was it more of a personal thing off on the side? Did it inform the work you did during those 10 to 12 hours? Did it, shape your character and your worldview that just naturally came into? Or did you find yourself in the middle of situations at that point? And we're always people in process, right?
Yeah.
But at that point, in the 80s, where did faith play into
it was a big part of it. I was in my late 20s, really involved in the church I was attending. I was married. And so my faith in Christ and it was really important to me. Probably the thing I dealt with, as I look back on it now, is that they were siloed in some ways, because I had gotten caught up. I use the word caught up because I didn't know it at the time, and I have a lot of gratitude toward the movement I became a part of, but I became a part of this kind of prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel that I was introduced to, that I promulgated, that I taught was black and white. You're going to get it or you're not going to get it. This is how it goes. If you do this is how it goes if you don't do that. And so everything was about performance. So I was in a profession that said, if you make this many calls, you'll get this many appointments. You get that many appointments. That made sense for my brain.
So you put the work in. You believe in God for it.
Yeah,
God's going to give it to you.
Yeah, because that gospel that I was a part of at that time in my life for my personality, it was ideal. You mean there's 7 steps to answered prayer? Yes. So if I do these 7 things, you'll get it. Yes. Oh, give me the 7.
I'm in.
Give me the 7. And so, then when I would teach those and somebody would come up to me and say, hey, I did all 7 and I didn't get what I asked for. And my arrogant response was that you missed one then. Because God's not a man that he should lie. So you missed number 6, or you probably missed number 4.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you were to look back on that, and I truly believe, and this is part of the not choosing the black and white world, and so the prosperity gospel in some circles can be 100% negative, and in some circles can be the only gospel, 100% positive. But I'll take it this angle. What is a healthy thing that you can look back on that in the prosperity gospel that you feel like at this point in your life as a mature follower of Jesus, that you could say, that there's an important principle that we shouldn't lose in that.
Oh, yeah.
But also, what is a shadow side of it that can lead towards some things that maybe veer away from what you understand the gospel to be today?
Great question. I've thought a lot about both sides of that. I'm trying to think how I want to organize this. Let me deal with the shadow side first.
Sure.
The shadow side, as I look back on it now, was it ill prepared me to deal with life, because I just thought you would just throw faith at it, or you took like this wand of faith and you could just command this and it would go away. That mountain's going to move. Just give it a second. I really thought that was the way you went at it. And And so it ill prepared me to deal with life. So when things would happen, somebody gets sick, something doesn't happen, I don't get a job, my son doesn't call me when he says, what, you pick the issue. Boy, I didn't know how to deal with it in my 30s, my young 30s. And so I became even more performance oriented. I thought there was more I had to do because there's got to be a reason that God's not, or He's allowing this too. And so I even pushed even harder into this kind of this debt, duty, and obligation way to approach God and approach life and approach people. I really did. The biggest benefit, though, was, I grew up in a Methodist church where there was very little being taught. There was very little movement in terms of growth and application of the Bible. And so when I got into the faith movement, as it's referred to, let's know the Bible. You got to know the Bible. You got to know what's in chapter 1, what's in chapter 2, what verses are you quoting, what are you memorizing, So the biggest benefit was it really got me in the Bible. Where I was attending church, the pastor there would often say, don't take my word for it. What's the Bible? And so, that was a big part of it.
Well, what I love about that, and even thinking about this in this way, is that we can sometimes wholesale reject or wholesale embrace a view, and we miss out on either side, right? And going back to when you talked about the shadow side, I heard recently someone say, life and the human body and human relationships and just human experience is not an equation. It's much more complicated than that.
It is.
And what you were saying made me think, the shadow side can be, whether it was intended this way or not, sometimes the application can turn life and faith into an equation. And if the output wasn't what you had hoped for, I heard you say, then you were just trying to put more in, change the input.
Yeah.
But even that doesn't always
work.
Equate, right?
No.
And there's mystery, and there's nuance, and there's the sovereignty of God, and there's complexity, right? Messiness.
Yeah, and we're measuring. And you look in the Gospels, you just don't see it. But at that time, you're measuring. What do you drive? If you, that's a testament to your faith.
Yeah.
What? Because I drive an old car, that means I don't have. Yeah. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. Maybe you don't. You don't.
You don't. Yeah. But then, like you said, the positive was it got you into God's word.
It did.
And even to hear a preacher saying, "Don't take my word for it," which is a really healthy thing for a preacher to say, because some preachers say,
"Yeah,
I'm the only one who knows the truth."
Right.
To swing the pendulum the other way.
Exactly.
So that's going on. And how were you introduced to the faith movement?
Oh my goodness, it's a
because it sounded like you jumped into the deep end. You were in it. You were living it. You were teaching it.
Oh man,
right?
Yeah, I was all over it.
And was this a church in Pasadena?
No, in Los Angeles, out in oh shoot. I don't know if I want to say, if it's okay to say the name, but
sure. I mean,
Crenshaw Christian Center.
Oh yeah, I know Crenshaw Christian Center. Oh yeah. And then when did that chapter transition to the next chapter for you in terms of a faith context?
I'm not sure. You've asked me two things. I got two thoughts here. What attracted me to it was this opportunity to be able to perform.
Yeah.
And so one day, this guy knew, he and I were going to prison ministries, and he said, "Dude, you got to go hear this guy preach. This guy, Fred Price, is phenomenal, and he's just saying things that nobody's saying." So I went to this church down on Crenshaw, and there's a line to get in this. What is happening right now?
This is not like my Methodist church I'm used to. Yeah.
Yeah. Where's Echo?
Yeah.
There's a line. So we go, oh man. And I jumped in with everything I had to be involved in that opportunity. And I did. I really enjoyed it. But life has its way, and we moved kind of the short of a very long story is we moved up to Oregon, which yada, 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 yada. But the reality what kind of kicked me out of that mindset was life. Life kicked my butt, Drew.
The equation just wasn't clean and easy.
And the formulas weren't working for me.
Yeah, interesting.
I couldn't dig my way out.
So first it was try harder, do more,
And
then
nothing.
eventually
And at
you
some
kind of
point,
reach the end of yourself.
you reach the end and go, wait a minute. What about trusting God? Wait, are you telling me Jesus wants a relationship with me? It's not transactional. This is not just I do this and I get this and we're all good. I go to God. I do what he says. I get this. We take these scriptures about, if you want to be his friend, you abide in me and I abide in you, and voila.
Yeah.
You get it all?
Easy peasy, get the car, get the yacht.
You get it all?
Yeah.
And so you get all these things, you get all this stuff, you get all, here comes, and by the way, there's, you get a little bit of peace and all these things come with it. And then you find, for me, I can't speak for others, but for me, when I found out that I could that God wanted actually more, that you really find out that this stuff is easy. This idea that God, meets your need, that's the easy part of this transaction. The hard part is we when we look at David as he talks throughout Psalms, not only Psalms 23, but 27 and 34, 37, where he's basically saying, hey, I just can I hang out with you? Can I dwell in your presence? And see, that's all I want. I don't want anything more than to be with you. Come on.
So what does Jack being with God look like right now? So we'll fast forward to 2025. David longed to be with the Lord. What is that, personally for you look like?
It's humble. It's knowing that, everything that happens, God's involved in it. It's not my effort. Yes, I need to give my effort. Yes, I want to do things heartily unto the Lord rather than man. Yes, I understand that. But I got to tell you, man, when I know that God's at work, not just when it's good, and I could tell you story after story after story. But my adopted dad just really helped me get through that, helped me understand that process over the last 20 years about who God is, how he works, when he gets involved, and that he's always involved. And I mean, you talk about a guy who knew the Bible.
So Dr. Parnell, who you're speaking about, so you lost your biological dad at the age of 8. You used to use the label of adoptive dad. Tremendous mentor in your life. How did you meet him? How did that whole relationship begin?
Well, Dr. Parnell would come and he would speak at my mom's church on occasion. And so he taught this he preached this one message that my mother just thought was amazing. And it was called, What's Love Got to Do with It? And this was right at the time Ike Turner came out with a song.
Big song.
And he had this message. And so he preached on that. My mother thought that was the best message she had ever heard. And it might have been,
And this was in Pasadena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
back at the Methodist church?
Yes, at that Methodist church that he called his home church. He and his wife, my adopted mom, really Hazelwood, where they would attend. And so when my mother passed away, I asked him if he could do the eulogy. And he was so sweet, the way that all worked out, and it's stories and stories. But when everything was over, when her memorial was over, I walked him to his car. And when I walked him to his car, he said, hey, Jack, I think if your mom was here right now, she would say, stay in contact with me. And so from that day until last October that he passed, I may have gone more than 2 weeks, once or twice, where I didn't speak or see him. But for the last almost 20 years, I've either seen him or spoke to him almost every week, or multiple times during the week,
And it's hard to wrap words around the depth of a friendship, a relationship, one in which it's like a father and a son. But what words would you use to describe how you were transformed and maybe how he was transformed? Because it's not always a one-way transaction.
Yeah, it took me a while to realize that.
Right?
Yeah.
But looking over, and again, we're just putting words shaped around decades of relationship.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit of how you were transformed over those and maybe even how you saw him change because of your relationship?
Yeah, Man, there's just so many aspects of him that were so amazing. But the one thing he did, the overarching thing, was he helped me understand grace. One day he and I were out golfing, and I said, Dad, what is grace anyway? I think I get it, but I don't think I get it. And so he hits the ball, and we could jump in the cart, and he says, Jack, I was going out to visit my dad in New York. I jumped on this train. I was going to visit my dad. He goes, my dad was the meanest man I knew. Didn't like him. I didn't like him at all. But I was going to be in New York, and I wanted to see him. And so I prayed to God while I was on that train, and I said, God, I don't know what to say to my dad. I have no idea what to say to him when I see him. Would you help me? And he said, Jack, I heard the voice of the Lord say, it's about time. He said, Jack, that's grace.
Wow.
It took me weeks to figure out what he meant. But we've had multiple conversations about the grace of God and what it looks like. Sometimes he would refer to it as the doggone grace of God. Just when you think that guy's going to get what he deserves, he got saved. Or just when you think God steps in and flips it around. So that dominated a lot of our conversations.
So grace before, how would you define grace before that? Or was it even on your radar of words that needed to be defined or lived out or experienced?
Yeah, Drew, I quoted scripture. I just, for we're saved by grace, or, grace is, grace is undeserved or unmerited favor. I'll take some of that, right? But when I started to understand what he was really saying, but there's this relationship, and that in this relationship, that God's saying, I'm not holding it against you that you didn't invite me in all this time, but I'm glad you did right now. I could have held it against you, but I didn't. And that what grace really looks like is a God who's for us and not against us. For most of my life, I knew he wasn't against me. I just wasn't sure he was for me. But, Doc would talk to me so much about, you don't get it. You don't see how he's moving you. Sorry.
Isn't that beautiful to look back at that relationship? And the grace is just one thing that he taught you.
So many things, yeah.
What relationship benefited the most from that new knowledge? Was it your relationship with God? Was it your relationship with yourself? Was it your relationship with past, present, future relationships?
I'd say with myself predominantly, but in those around me, it made me softer. It made me consider different words to communicate differently. And then when I became a business owner, I became a big proponent of second chances, a big proponent of understanding that people don't always get it right the first time. That's not what you learn in the house I grew up in. Mm-hmm. My mother, I wasn't raised that way. Wasn't religiously oriented that direction. But to actually start living in a way where you apply grace in business, where I would come in, it got to the point where I come in with my managers, I'd say, what is John doing here? And my manager would say, I thought I'd give him another chance. Okay. Well, how about that? Well, let's see how it works out. But it was so contagious, that it worked beautifully.
So before that experience with Doc, with this amazing man in your life, what was I'll use this metaphor, what tape played in your head that was language that you would say about yourself that was not grace-filled? Because I've got some of those tapes that I got to choose to turn off and replace, take out of the tape deck, put a different tape in.
Yeah, I still have too many of them hanging around, but I was just hard on myself. And I think the overarching thought was nothing was ever good enough. Whatever I did, I could do more.
Even success in
whatever I accomplished, I should have done more. And if you had only done this, and if you hadn't done that, and boy, I could spend a lot of time in my head reconfiguring, hindsighting myself about how I should have done that differently to get a better result.
And so it's interesting, you're kind of playing with fire as a stockbroker, because Boy, what potential for success to feed that performance, mindset, but also there's always somebody who's got more sales, doing better, bigger margins, bigger gains.
Yeah,
or woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
I should have held for longer, should have sold sooner.
Oh boy,
right?
yeah, and all that's very real, and it was very real for me in my late 20s, early 30s. Man, it was exhausting. What an exhausting way to live. To constantly, no matter what you do, no matter what people say, it didn't really matter. Even if occasionally I speak at a church or something, somebody say, "Great message." Yeah, right. I could only think of
the things that you
8
didn't
things
say.
I didn't say or did wrong. In business, same way. I did 3, but I should have done 5. I hit that metric, but I should have got 8 more metric. It just was always something.
So grace before that was a word, was a concept, but it touched deep into your soul and into the reality of your life. Looking back on that relationship, how do you think he was changed, Dr. Purnell, in his relationship with you?
Oh boy. I'm not sure how he would answer that. I know what I think. Let me start off by answering it this way. Maybe I can back into it. When he was in his final days before he passed, I was with him by his bedside, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I think we've said everything we need to say. I think we've said all the words. Is there anything that you can think of that needs to be else that can be said? We've conveyed our love for each other, yada, yada, yada." He said, "Jack," he said, "we've had a good run. We had a good run." And to me, that he just really summarized these 20 years of he and I kind of filling in gaps for each other. He lost his oldest son to cancer. Phil passed away probably about almost 10 years ago now. And so it wasn't that I came in and filled the gap of Phil, because I'm nothing like Phil. Phil's a different personality, different person. But, I kind of came in more with, okay, well, what are you going to do? Because Dr. Purnell is a supreme theologian, supreme. And so a lot of my conversations with him and a lot of my encouragement to him was, no, that's right. No, that's what the book says. That's what that scripture says. There's very few passages that you could bring up that he could not extract more from that.
Deep analysis, yeah.
Yeah. But the doing, so I give an example. I come back from help building a home for Habitat for Humanity. So I stopped by his house on the way home. So I'm sitting there and I say, "Yeah, Dad, I was just over at Habitat for Humanity. We're building a house, da, da, da." He goes, "I know the founder of Habitat for Humanity." And then he gives me all the history. He tells me all the history about Habitat for Humanity, how they formed. It's beautiful. "Dad, have you ever helped build a house?" "No, I never built a house."
But I know
But I know
that.
Right?
I know all about it.
Yeah. So my, what I would do with him is I put him in the car. Let's go.
Head to hands.
Let's go. Let's go get in. Let's go do something. And encourage him to, take what God had done through him and what he had would have been created around him. His I don't know to call it fame, but he was a rock star in that industry or in that field. And so let's use that. Let's do something with it. Let's go. And it really kind of moved him to be in places he wouldn't normally be in, and it was fun. It was fun.
And what's amazing is that deep relationship, which, thank you gave us, the tip of the iceberg, right? Never would have existed had not he came to do the eulogy for your mom's funeral. And so much of life is that unexpected, going back to how life is not an equation.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest gifts and blessings that you've had in your entire life came out of a season of loss of your mom. And yet there was this beautiful relationship for you to call him Dad and for him to call you son.
Yeah, and that's how it was. Yeah. He wanted to get me on the board at Fuller. And so when when I went to go interview with the president of Fuller at that time, who's just a terrific man. He asked me a question. He goes, what do you call Bill? And I said, Dad? He goes, what? Call him Dad. I've never called him Bill, right? And so he couldn't believe. He's like, who is this person sitting in front of me that would do that?
With this icon of a theologian, with he's got is it a building named after him at Fuller? Is that right?
Yeah. It's African American studies. It was kind of kind of tandem with the School of Psychology, but he's got a building named after him. His portrait's up in the library.
I can picture it and see it. And it was such an honor to meet him and co-officiate. And he gave words at your wedding that was so sweet and so special.
The one thing I do want to, if I can mention, that his family did, not just him, but his wife and his kids as well, is they made room for me. Here I am, my mother's gone, my father's gone, and they made room for me. So, I got invited to every family event. Anytime everybody's getting together for dinner, he made sure to include me and my family and my children. So I learned from that how expansive love is, that, you can make room, that there's, and then you take that thought a little further, right, Drew? That the things we want the most, there's no shortage of.
Say more.
This idea, we say we want connection, right? We say we do, but there's no shortage. I could tell you story after story after story of connection. I became really good friends with the guy who towed my car a couple of months ago. We got, I'm riding in a tow truck with the guy who towed my, and the guy, Eric and I now are, next time I go.
You're friends with the tow truck driver.
Oh man, we're hanging out. Right? This idea of connection, we say we want it. There's no shortage of it. We say we want it.
But you've got to work towards it, right? You got to get out of your comfort zone.
No
make
shortage
sacrifices.
of love. Yeah. No shortage of love. There's the things we say we want the most. There's no shortage of at all. I think sometimes we have to think about where do we want it. Where we might not always come from the sources we want it to. But it's still love. It's still connection. It's still peace. We sometimes, in my own life, I wanted it to come a certain way. It's got to come this way. But if we allow God to be God and do it the way God does things, right? It becomes something even more beautiful because it's love we didn't anticipate. It becomes bigger and more voluminous, when you look at it, and typically it's rear view, we look back, but sometimes not always. At present view, you can go, oh my gosh, look what happens when you open up to the very thing you say you want the most, instead of, fighting this or trying to prove something all the time.
Or trying to believe that this is how God's going to do it. This is what we want. We want connection, peace, love, but how he's going to provide or how we're going to get it might look different. There's this old preacher illustration that applies here. And I've heard so many preachers say this, and it kind of illustrates this. This is going to apply to a couple of situations. There was somebody out in the ocean and their little boat that they were driving broke down and started to sink. Maybe you've heard this. And as they're sinking, they cry out to God, God, help me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, a helicopter comes, and a helicopter, bullhorn down. Hey, I'm here to help you. No, it's okay. I'm waiting for God to help. Well, I'm here. No. God's going to save me. The helicopter flies off. Another boat comes alongside. Hey, we're here to help you. No, I'm good. God's going to come. Boat's still sinking.
Yeah.
We're here to help you. No, I'm waiting on God to save me. And the person eventually, multiple things come by. They end up dying. They go to God in heaven and say, God, where were you? What do you mean? I sent a helicopter. I sent a boat. I sent an ocean liner. Yeah. Sometimes we're so narrowly focused on how God's going to do it that we miss.
Exactly. Let me tell you, in business, that exact thing happened to me. I played it out exactly as you just said. I'd gone into business with a guy. I'd moved up to Oregon, gone into business with a guy. We had partnered in an investment advisory firm to manage money, started a couple of mutual funds. Long stories. Everything went wrong. I bought him out, right? I bought him out, and then we started going along, and we're trying to build a business in the advisory firm. Wasn't going that well. I mean, it got worse and it got worse and it got worse and then it got worse. And so I get a call from a bank that says, hey, we've got your information attached to this bank account. We can't keep this cash on our books. We've got to get rid of it. Were you the owner? Was your company the company that did X? Yes. Was your company the one that provided the work for this fund? Yes. Well, then this is your money because we have nowhere else to send it and we can't keep it. What? So $60,000, right? Oh my God, here comes $60,000. I was struggling, and so here comes this $60,000 the next day, Drew, no exaggeration, in my bank account. And so we were struggling to that point. So instead of getting out of business and paying off all my debts and then going on with being debt-free, I took that as God saying, let's market. That's God telling me to go. So, man, I took out ads. I did all kind of marketing campaigns, blew through that $60,000 in about 6 months. And 6 months, maybe 7 months later, I was selling my office desk, my coffee pot. I was in massive amounts of debt. And 6 months after that, I'm living off credit cards. It just went straight down.
So this could have gone two different, well, it could have gone 1,000 different angles, but just for the point of the conversation, it could have gone the other direction. It could have gone to, and then the next decade we 10X and I sold it to a private equity and, here I am, I got a house in, 3 different continents.
That was my story.
Yeah,
That's the one I wanted.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's what you thought would happen.
Yeah.
And if it did go that route, and you're telling everyone, hey, you get this, you double down, but it didn't go that route.
No, lost everything.
Living
off credit cards.
No
exaggeration.
So what's the takeaway? Because sometimes people want the takeaway to be, it goes back to the equation, right? If I just do this, then this will happen. So you sincerely thought that that's where God was sending you down.
I did. I thought this was it. But I was also in a mindset of, God wouldn't want me to close even in his failing. But it would have gave me, I would have had the opportunity to get out debt free and I could have, gone to another company, go to work, reestablish myself, and I would have saved my family and myself just a ton of heartache.
So would you categorize that as a regret that you wish you would have taken a different direction there?
Oh, I wouldn't categorize it as regret. I would say it was a part of my learning process.
Yeah.
I was arrogant, 30-something. You couldn't have told me anything different. There's no circumstances or anything that would have made me do it different.
And now that we're decades removed from that, and I'll bring a passage in, Scripture says that God works all things together for good. And sometimes we'll never see that good in this lifetime, or we don't have visibility to how it's good, even for somebody else through the ripple effect. Great mystery there that I fully acknowledge.
Yeah.
But is there anything looking back on that God taught you or did, or that you've learned from in retrospect?
Yeah,
that is
oh my gosh, there's so much I learned from that event itself. That it galvanized me. To get how do you get through failure, and how important that is. I got to tell you, Drew, if I'm interviewing somebody, if I'm looking, like when I used to hire and do stuff when I worked at the bank, everyone who just leaps from the right college to the right master's program to the right, you haven't, tell me where things didn't just go, where everything just didn't go your way.
Where it hit the fan, you've been tested.
How do you respond in not even crisis, just when you don't get what you want?
And you find that more valuable as somebody who's hired people, who's been through that, and has demonstrated that they can stay, endure, grow, learn, be humble, ask for help, versus somebody who's had just the silver spoon, easy trajectory.
And I'm not mad at that guy.
Sure, of course.
I kind of would prefer that.
It would be nicer, much easier that way, right?
Right. But I'm so grateful for the way things have worked out, because it galvanized me around. Let's go. What can we not? We can do it. I went through that, and I'm still here. Drew, I got through that. went through here, started over here, did all that. At 40 years old, I had nothing. I had no retirement, nothing, right? I was working.
And is this just on the backside of that experience up in Oregon? Okay.
Yeah, so I get through that. I kind of pull myself out by the grace of God. I get a job. I'm coming back to California, and I owe a ton of money. I have no retirement because anything I had to give it up. I owe taxes. I owe retirement. I had no retirement at all. And so I'm 40 years old.
Starting over from scratch, to say it that way.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I'd gone through a divorce. Now I'm telling people, I used to say I have dead people furniture. The furniture in my house, like a friend of mine, his aunt died. He said, "Hey, my aunt died. We don't know what we're going to do with the furniture. I'll take it." And then one of my mother's best friends passed away. We don't know what we're going to do with hers, so I'll take it. And that's why I furnished my house, with what I call dead people furniture. I literally had nothing to start from. So from 40.
And do you, if I could just ask,
go.
Right in that moment, because I know people who are in that moment right now for various reasons, and they might describe it differently. And as a pastor, I'm very sensitive to not just throw verses at them, because sometimes it's just sitting with somebody, listening, walking that journey. Looking back, was there a person or an experience or even God who you feel like was with you when nothing else was there? So you didn't have the retirement. You had dead people furniture, divorced. Were you completely alone?
It felt like it.
Felt like you were alone.
It felt like it. It felt like, like you were, I don't want to be too dramatic, but just like you, from Charlie Brown, like your pig pen. You smell, nobody really wants to be around you. I had family members didn't call. Why don't you call? Well, we didn't know what to say, with the divorce and everything. I just felt so ashamed of my life, ashamed of the way things had worked out. I didn't think I failed. I felt like I was a failure. Even though I still had a really good job. So it shifted to identity, and that's where shame really kicks in. Oh, my God.
Guilt can be I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong, a failure, a mess up, whatever it is. And you can spiral so quickly in that.
And I lived in that.
How long was that period for?
It was a few years. It took some a good dose of counseling from a lady that I just admire so much. She was so helpful. And it took me doing some rewiring in the way I looked at life and the way I looked at myself and the way I looked at my past. Because, my past was just living in front of me all the time at that period in my life. And so it just kept me from everything. I was alone and felt alone. And so it really, there wasn't one moment, there wasn't one
flip of the switch.
One flip of the switch, but it was a kind of a slow grind of day in, day out, approaching life differently and putting God in my life rather than me trying to perform for him. And this idea that he could accept me. I heard this story once, and I think it's somewhat apropos here. There was, I think this was in Holocaust, and this guy, this father and his son, 8-year-old or 10-year-old son, were about to be hung by the German soldiers. And from the crowd, someone yelled out, "Where is God in all this?" And a voice came from the other side of the crowd and said, "He's right here." What? Are you kidding me right now? That story rocked me. This is the God I serve, that this horrific thing can be happening, and yet he's here. So it really started to move me away from the shame and away from so much of the guilt.
What was it about that story that moved you away? And how do you see, or how do you interpret God being there in the midst of such a horrific atrocity?
Well, there's a scripture that I'm sure you know that says that he shuns the proud, and he gives grace to the humble. And so I figured I was in category A, and that God has just turned his back on me, and he should. He has every right to. I get it. I made a ton of mistakes. I did things wrong. I said this and did that. I was supposed to go up. I went down. I said I was going to go left, and I went right. Yeah, I get it.
Equation.
It's where I should be.
Yeah.
But I heard that story and stories like that that helped me understand that he's actually was with me through all that. Then I made some really bad choices, undeniable. But that my God didn't stop loving me. There was no point in that he stopped loving me, stopped caring about me, and stopped cheering for me and wanting me to live in a different way. And so it really helped move me toward that. I tell you that, and through this counseling, I'd gone through a lot more on and off for about 4 years. And I think about the last session, I half joke and half not said to Nancy, I said, well, I don't know what I'll do now. I guess I'll now go become an alcoholic or something, And she said this, I couldn't believe she said this to me. She goes, you probably will. What? You can't say that.
This was your last counseling session.
You probably will.
What did she mean by that, you think?
She understood who I was. And she knew my propensity was I'll find something else if I'm not careful. And this idea of love and with God, that there's a good chance you will find another thing to fight, another thing to work against, and work off. And
her verbalizing that, how did that sit in your heart, in your mind in that moment?
It was
unexpected, but
it slapped me upside my head. So
you needed to hear
way.
that, yeah.
And a beautiful. I didn't like those words,
yeah.
But boy, you know what? She was right.
Was it an awareness of I can't take this for granted? I can't go into autopilot because that autopilot might drive me into a cliff. I got to keep doing the work.
Yeah,
stay humble, right?
Yeah, it really became. More about he shuns the proud.
Yeah.
And he gives grace to the humble. That this idea that God, if you humble yourself, you can get any translation you want. It's you have to humble yourself. The things that come behind that are pretty outstanding. And so when you get this idea of what true humility looks like and what grace looks like within all that, right? This idea that if I just give myself to God and say, God, this is all I have, and it might, like the song says, it might not be much, but it's all I have. This idea that God can use me the way he wants to use me became so profound for me. And it really began to whip my life around. It was just huge effect. So why don't you describe then that the career trajectory at that point? From a career standpoint, literally, no exaggeration, at 40, I've got nothing.
Dead people furniture. I love that that description.
Yeah. At 62, I'm walking in, 22 years later, I'm walking into my manager, called my manager and said, I'm retired, I'm out. And then
by choice, because you have the financial freedom. Not because you're overwhelmed.
I take my business that I developed, the restaurants that I've developed over that time, add it to the number of restaurants I had, and then sell those 3 years ago. And so now I sit here today, some 25, 26 years later, and I don't have to work another day in my life. 40, broke, nothing. Had a good job, but I had no retirement, nothing. Today, at 67, if I don't have to work another day in my life.
And so you're in this reality right now, and we talked a bit about this at lunch yesterday. You don't have to, but you want to make an impact. And you're at this sweet season of life, and there's so many people who are part of this church. And I imagine some listening who are at this point in their life where they have this experience, they have the skills, they know what it's like to have much and have nothing, and they can be in this season either people who kind of have a life ordered around their comfort, and some people choose that, or it can be a life of purpose and of sacrifice and investment for the sake of others. And so, we'll kind of wrap up here, but there might be a to be continued often in the future. But what excites you the most in this season right now as it relates to the horizon that's before you?
What excites me the most is, this opportunity to wait on God, which is not something I've been good at most of my life. And to take an approach of, there's nothing I need to do to convince anybody that I'm a good person or not a good person, or I have enough or don't have enough. Even when I say I don't have to work anymore, it sounds a little arrogant to me, but I don't mean it that way. It's just meant to, it's the testimony, is I really don't. My wife and I don't think about it that way. My wife and I we were looking up to go get some ice cream one day, and I said, we looked. She goes, "Here's a place." I said, "It's $12 for a scoop of ice cream."
It's LA for you.
I'm not doing that. She's like, "Why not? You can afford." No, it's just in my mind. I just don't think about it that way. But it's a testimony that only by the grace of God, that really only by the grace of God,
but not from a prosperity gospel set, right? Because there's
grace.
It's total
nothing
grace.
I do.
Yeah,
right.
Isn't that interesting?
And I could go on and on and on about that. But the opportunity now is, what do you do with what God has done with me? What He's curated in me over all these years. Not just to give me, information, but to give me expertise, not just to give me experience, but to galvanize me into some areas of my life where, if put to use, if used right, can help somebody else and kind of move someone else or something forward. I think about being a part of an effort that, like I told you yesterday, this massive, massive boulder, that I can be one of those people that are trying to push that initiative forward, pick the initiative. I've got a few that I'm passionate about today, but I'm just saying to be a part of that. I don't need to lead that effort. I want to be a part of an effort, because when you're all behind the boulder, you're so connected. You're pushing when somebody else can't push. It's just, we get to go on and on about that analogy.
And it's a big enough boulder that it needs more than just you to push.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so that's where, I got plenty in the tank, and I want to use it wherever God wants me to use it.
Love it. Well, it's exciting. Thanks for coming on to At the Table.
Pleasure,
so great. Great getting 2 days in a row with you.
This has been awesome.
And, those conversations are like a Venn diagram. We talked about so much more yesterday that we didn't talk about today, but then we talked so much more today that we didn't talk about yesterday. So looking forward to all that God has for you. If people wanted to follow up with you, are you a pretty public person, or, some of the people I'm like, what's your Instagram handle and what's your website? And
not on any social media.
What a nice, sweet reality that is.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful.
So if anybody wants to get word to you, they can reach you. They can come say hi.
Yeah.
We'll grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah, if you send me an email, I'm not going to respond.
There you go.
So come say hi.
Well, blessings to you, and thanks for being on.
No, thanks for having me, Drew. It means so much. It really does.
Amen. Well, it means the world that you would choose to join us and stay through the end of this episode of At the Table. It's a huge help for us if you were to rate and review and share this podcast with people. Of course, those 5 stars gives us the opportunity to reach more people, but also we'd love to hear from you. In this season, I've got an email. It's pastordrew@belair.org. Would love to interact with you. Maybe you've got some people that you would like to recommend for this podcast, but also we have resources for our church. One of the unique things about who we are as a church family isn't just our 70-year history, but it's also the people who make up this church family. And we long to be a church at work. And that's not just the people doing the work of God when we're on this campus, but it's the people of God engaged in the work that they're doing in this world. And so we'd love for you to be on that journey with us. Reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for choosing to join us for At the Table.